Hadouken!
Hi there, hello and welcome to an artist's guide to animation producers. So this session is hosted by myself, Bob Thompson. I'm a regular tutor here at Escape. I tend to come in to do specialist courses on particularly production, and I run a short course here for 8 weeks, which is coming up soon, in producing animation, which is really geared to members of production crew or people with some experience of being in the animation industry who want to transfer that over to producing. But today it's a slightly different vibe. What we want to talk about today is the relationship between the artist animator, you could be a technical person on the animation scene, and how you work with, interact, understand, and generally engage with producers. Producers are not necessarily from Mars, just as animators aren't exactly from Jupiter. What I'm kind of trying to get to, though, is the idea that a lot of people think producers are purely business people, animators are purely creative people, and in fact, we've all got the capacity to be both. And more importantly than that, it's beneficial to you as an artist if you want to go on and continue your career, stepping up into supervisory roles, heads of department, or senior roles in the production sphere. It's really good for you to understand how a producer works and how they think. And equally, it's great for anyone that wants to go into the production department itself to understand what it is they're doing, how to view the world, maybe from a slightly different viewpoint, but still understand that we're all creative people taking risks, doing innovative things in the creative space. We're just doing slightly different things. So anyway, the first challenge I have is my slide is not moving. Here we go. An artist's guide to animation producers. So we're going to talk about 3 things today. What an animation producer does, what producers do for artists, and I'm going to try and get you to start to think about how it is that you can look through the lens or look at the world from a producer's point of view. I'm going to move us along from what an animation producer does to have a look further into how we define it. Now, Producers Guild of America has this slightly dull description of a producer's role. It's the person who bears most of the responsibility for a film's production. You can insert TV program or advert or whatever you want into that. But in other words, the producer has a significant decision-making authority over all phases of the film's production. And I think that's kind of a fair description, but it really doesn't get there for me. So I'm going to move on and look at what an actual specific producer says about it. And this is Kathleen Kennedy. You'll know her from Star Wars and many other productions. She says that a producer is really the translator that works the relationship between the director and the writing team to bring the production about. What she's sort of saying here, and you could say it was that she's taking the money side of the equation, the audience side of the equation, and the artistic production side of the equation, and bringing those 3 things together. And I think that's kind of taking what the PGA says, and Kathleen sorts of gets us somewhere, but it doesn't really tell me what a producer does. And I'm keen that you really understand that. So what I want to do is, this is my definition, and this is exactly looking at what a producer actually has to do. So a good producer has to identify what people want to watch. They have to decide who gets to call the shots. Who's he going to put in charge? Who's the core team? Who's the director? And particularly call the shots, that expression, it's an old-fashioned expression and it's used a lot, but we don't really necessarily know its true meaning. Is the idea that the director calls the shots is literally from the film industry, where the director is the person who has the sole responsibility for what's inside the shot. Resourcing the shot, finding the story for the shot, all of those other responsibilities are not the directors. So there's a sort of an interesting thing here going on here. The producer also chooses what story gets made. That's really fundamental to producing. It's the ability to see something it's investable, Is it producible? Is it realizable before, even the directors involved usually, the producers had to make those creative decisions first. Okay. And then during production, the producer takes responsibility for getting it done on time and on budget. And that sort of comes back to that Producers Guild view. Okay. So I'm going to move along. And I think what we're trying to get to, and this is really truncating the story a lot, but the producer is an entrepreneur. Yeah. They are the businessman, the innovator of the project. But they're also the managers, and they must plan, command, make decisions, and communicate and delegate all the way through production, or they will fail. And those are the skills and roles of a leader. And I think a good producer is both leader and entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs don't have to be leaders, leaders don't have to be entrepreneurs, but a producer has to encompass both of those functions. Which brings us neatly to the end of, we know what a producer does roughly now, and if you've got some experience of being on set, you should have a pretty good idea of that. The next thing I think is, how do the crew see a producer? And I've been a producer on 4 feature films. I've done several theme parks, and I'm currently working on a TV show. And crews often have some fairly strange ideas when you get them to one side and get them to talk honestly about what a producer is and what they do. My favorite one is, what do you say to a producer when they're up to their neck in wet concrete? And the answer is, keep on pouring, or not enough concrete. Yeah, that was actually told to me by a member of the crew on one of the projects that I worked on as a producer. It was after a few beers on a Friday night. But anyway, that's hopefully not what you think about producers, but maybe there's a time and a place for that. And I think that kind of the us and them mentality comes around from a few different things. And I'm going to try and explain to you where that comes from. So artists and producers generally meet in a production meeting. And in a production meeting, it's really important that, as artists and creatives, you understand it's not the producer's job to tell you, answer your questions, or any of those things. Telling you directly from the producer to the artist is going to undermine delegation. And as soon as you undermine delegation, you're going to have chaos. And when I say delegation, the producer appoints someone to manage the crew or to manage a certain aspect of the production that you're working in. If you go to the producer directly and the producer says, hey, that's a great walk cycle, I'm really happy with it. The following morning, the director walks in and goes, that walk cycle's crap, redo it, start again. You've got an instant problem where the artist now no longer knows who to go to. So producers try, if it's at all possible, and avoid answering questions directly back to crew for this simple reason. You undermine the delegated authority that you've given to other members of the crew. And I think as crew, I think it's often illuminating when you suddenly tell an artist that I can't tell you that because if I did that, that would undermine the authority of all the other people that are working with me. And crew suddenly go, pennies dropped. So what does the producer do? The producer's role for you as a member of the crew is to provide leadership. They should be clear about the roles and responsibilities of the people working with them. They should offer good judgment and fair judgment. They should be decisive. And this is an interesting one. If you look at a lot of management theory, there was a famous book written in the 1980s on management theory by Burns and Stalker. And they studied how companies performed when they made decisions. And what they discovered was that the companies that were most successful didn't necessarily make the best decisions. What they did is they made decisions quickly, acted on them, and if they didn't work out, acted again quickly. That was the defining difference. And as a producer, you often have to make decisions with very imperfect knowledge. So giving good knowledge to the producer will help them make better decisions. But ultimately, producers have to make decisions quickly because it's more efficient to make a bad decision and change your mind often than to be indecisive. In fact, there's a famous book about Goldcrest films called, and you don't have to read the book, the title tells you everything you need to know. The Goldcrest films autobiography by Jake Eberts is actually called My Indecision is Final. And essentially, they couldn't make decisions, things were happening too fast, and they went bust, they went under because they could not decide, and they essentially panicked as managers. And that's the end of it. So good judgment, but decisive decision-making and action is really, really crucial to a producer. So if producers make bad decisions and you think, oh my God, that's the worst decision ever, you can help them by telling them when it's not working out. You can help them by telling them properly and honestly that these things aren't working. But yeah, don't rub their face in it, because yeah, there's a balance here. They're making lots of fast decisions and you don't want to be the one that sticks it on them. You want to be a helpful asset to them. Producers also inspire and instigate action and progression. I love the Americans have a great word for this, which kind of brings it all down, which is moxie. Yeah, people talk about I want a self-starter. You know the expression self-starter? That means moxie. That's the get up and go. That's the drive. That's the entrepreneur that says, hey, let's get out of bed and get this done. That's not necessarily a particularly extrovert feature. So you have to balance that, because a producer also needs to be a people person. They need to be able to earn the respect of the team. They need to be listening and engaging with others. So it's a tricky balance to find, that unique mix of the introvert requirement to get up and be self-motivated with the extrovert capacity to deal with people on an everyday basis. And producers also need to effectively delegate, because they would go crazy. You've got 200 people making decisions. You can't make all the decisions for them. You need to push that down into the crews where it's locally happening, because people make much better decisions closer to the problem than you will up on high. Yeah, a producer has to observe and utilize the talents of the team. Sometimes people are afraid of producers because they do have to do a bit of hiring and firing during productions. People put into productions are often put together quickly. Some of them work, some of them don't work, some of them gel, some of them don't gel. I've been fortunate in my career. I've not had to do a great deal of hiring and firing, but I've certainly been involved in productions where that's happened. And yeah, with a little bit of hindsight and perspective, it's largely been needed. The last and probably the most challenging thing that a producer has to manage is the issue of loss of face. And we're going to talk a little bit more in a second about how that comes about and where that comes from. But I've also put up here some great leaders and a little characteristics of great leaders list. I don't know if that's a perfect list, but have a look at that and think about that in terms of how you are as a person and how you relate to people on the production, because the more you can tick those boxes, the more interesting you will be as an employee. And so producers, where producers really come alive and you really see them is if you're in the heads of department team. You might be called the senior management team or the core team, the safe place, or it might be the war room. Different productions have different names for it, but all producers have the same idea, that there's a place where the senior members of the team can get together, they can speak their mind freely without consequence, they can iron out difference in private, and they can preserve unity of command that way. Now, anyone that's been at all looking at recent British politics, where we've got the pro and the against Brexit people in that cabinet room, they are not respecting the safe place in the war room. And look at what's happening to chain of command, clarity of communication. Okay, the executive team has to absolutely support the producer, and the producer has to absolutely support the executive team, or the war room or the safe place or the core team or whatever you want to call it falls apart. And that's really important to understand. So this is where you say to the producer, hey, my shot looks great. Look at that walk cycle. Do you like it? And the producer says, that's very interesting. I'll let the director comment on that. If the producer had said in that scenario, I love that walk cycle, and the director had come in the next morning and said, I hate that walk cycle, redo it, you will instantly have problems in this war room. The trick to this is The producer has to always be responsible for what they say and allow the director to have that power and authority. If they then decide in that war room, the producer really loves your walk cycle and hates the director's choice of walk cycle, that's where they fix that, not in front of you, not on the floor, not in front of the crew. So those things are sometimes difficult to understand for crew members, and it often leads to uncertainty when that's going wrong. So if you're a member of a crew where that's happening, you'll know that that's going wrong now. You'll understand it. I'm not saying it's going to help you get out of a difficult situation, but at least you'll understand why it's happening and you won't go mad. So how does all this knowledge benefit artists? Well, first of all, if you've got a good producer, you'll know that they're an entrepreneur and they've made your job happen. They've made this production come alive. They'll be taking, you'll see evidence, and there will be a culture in the production which is responsible, it's moral, and it's getting effective work done. Some producers do it by authoritarian tyrannism. You know, there is a time and a place for that. That works for some people. That's not how I do it, but that's the important thing is that it's an effective organizational culture. It gets the job done. Hopefully it's a pleasant one and you'll enjoy it as an experience as an artist, because that'll make you come back again if you're a good artist. The producer must always be the ultimate decision maker, but that doesn't mean they're making every decision, and it certainly doesn't mean they're going to make decisions in front of you. A good producer will be the ultimate decision maker, but they'll delegate responsibility for the decisions to the crew back down. It could be to the head of department that's bemoaning the existence of the producer. That's just part of life. But a good head of department will know that the producer is looking at things differently from them. Maybe they'll understand the good reasons for it. Maybe they won't. But ultimately, the producer's job is to set the tone. The head of department is to give you that direction. If you've got a good producer, you'll notice that they observe and they utilize the talents of their team. That's the important role of the producer, is running the core team. And if they run the core team well, generally the core team will run the production well. They manage loss of face well in the core team. You know, core team meetings are designed to be highly, contested events. You know, there will be the technical department saying, hey, we can't do any more water, and the director saying, hey, we need more retakes. Those things are where they get resolved, and someone will be a winner and someone will be a loser. The producer has to take responsibility for that, and they then have to smooth down the ruffled feathers afterwards and make sure that you've got an effective working team afterwards. Okay, so a producer has to make tough decisions in tough circumstances. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is usually the characteristic of the villain in every good Hollywood movie. So, how do we look at the world as artists? If you think animation is development, pre-production, production and post, 90 times out of 100, I ask one of the students here this question, and they'll say, oh yes, that's it, that's everything, that's the whole thing, that's what we do. We do development, pre-production, post-production, production and post-production. And I always say to them that you're looking down the wrong end of the telescope, like the lady here, because when you're looking down the right end of the much bigger producer's telescope, you see more things. You see that there's a market, you see that there's an audience, and you see that you've had to identify an opportunity. Then you've had to do development, then you've had to go and find funding, you've had to deal with cost of money and currency rates that change and all manner of different problems as you go through getting the project ready to be financed. Then you do your pre-production, production and post-production, which I'm sure we all know about. And then the thing that most people seem to forget when they work on production is that sales and marketing is A, more expensive often than the production itself, B, more time consuming on the producer, and C, more important, it's the thing that gets people into the cinema or onto the television screen to watch the production that you've spent all this time and all that money and all that labor and love has gone into making. So it's really easy to forget that, but my first film had a $5 million budget and a $15 million sales and marketing budget. It made $50 million, which was a great success. But as a producer, I learned very quickly that my responsibilities to the production are important, but my responsibilities to sales and marketing are also important. So distribution is much forgotten by the crew, but it's a major, major part of a good producer's life. So the animation business, it's bigger than just production. And here's an example from one of the films I worked on. It took a year to identify the buyer and the funder. Devising the opportunity, writing the screenplay and deciding how the animation was going to be done, another year. Packaging up the resources, finding the finance, finding the director, finding the right studio to do the work, 3 years. Making the film 1.5 years, and then it took another year to actually bring that film to market. So there was a year's work in marketing, finance, planning, all of that stuff to do with the distribution, not to do with the production. So when you see a producer and you think, do you know what? They're really not focused on the production. You're looking at this balance here where they're actually maybe 30% involved in the production when it's going on and 70% involved in all this other stuff that has to be done for the film to be successful. I want you to consider the choice as an artist and then as a producer of how you would solve these next 3 questions. So I want you to think about that and reflect on that afterwards. Do you spend time perfecting the 4th retake or deliver on time? This might be an important shot, but does it have to be super polished? Is it good enough? Can we release it? Those are difficult decisions. As an artist, you'll always take it. Do you take the most efficient process or the fastest? Well, as an artist, you would probably take the most efficient because it's the least work for you. As a producer, maybe you'll think about what's the fastest because you know that every dollar that you've got there is costing 10% per annum in interest fees. And if you miss your deadline, there may be a window for release that you have to wait for. So you might choose faster over more efficient. Would you choose to spend extra on animators or actors? It's a tough call, but very often when you hear films being sold, they're sold on the actors, not the quality of the animation. So maybe as a producer, you might have a different view about the value of actors compared to animators. My view is spend money on both, get them both as good as you possibly can, but have a balance that's suited to your budget. But these are problems that you think about a different way when you start to look down the producer end of the telescope rather than the wrong end. So how does this help you as an animator? I think the most important thing it does for you is it makes you instantly more promotable. It makes you easier to hire because hopefully now you understand some of these things, you'll immediately be better as a leader and you'll certainly have the capacity to learn how to be a better leader from this. I think it'll help you if you can look up from the production context and then look at the wider context, the business context. And I often challenge my students to, okay, pretend this isn't a movie, pretend you're building a building. Are you building a building for the art and joy of bricklaying, or are you building a building for people to enjoy at the end of it? How's it going to be? How are people going to get into that? What's the sales and distribution plan for that? But if you start to think about those bigger, wider context things, you'll understand management better. You'll be able to add value to department meetings and hopefully get into the core meetings because you're the kind of person that adds that kind of value. And they're the skills that will move you up. That's what will get you to supervisor. That's what will get you up to head of department. That's what will get you up to director, assistant producer, associate producer, whatever your next career move is. These are things that will help you get there. So that's me. I'm going to try and wrap up now. I know I'm conscious that I've slightly overrun, but I hope you've enjoyed an artist guide to animation producers. And I hope you've discovered that, there's more to producing than necessarily meets the eye when you're on the crew. And I hope that we'll have some prospective producers in some of the audience in the future.